Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
Before we get started with this week's discussion, I have an announcement for all cognitive security and information thought leaders. And if you're listening to this podcast, that probably means you. We welcome your submission of original content suitable for our professional community. And we recently updated our article submission guidelines, and there is a link to this in the show notes. IPA is fortunate to have an informed and experienced readership with high standards. Our readers include defense practitioners and planners, government policymakers, journalists, academics, technologists, futurists, and venture capitalists. And so we seek to publish authoritative, experienced, and authentic voices who have something important to contribute to our generational challenge, cognitive security. And now on to this week's discussion. My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Dr. Jeff Engstrom, who is a senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation. His research focuses on Asia-Pacific security and foreign policy issues, China's warfighting concepts and capabilities, coercion theory and use of coercive military force, and military intervention and security cooperation. Jeff Engstrom, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
The conversation I'd like to have with you today, Jeff, will cover your report entitled Systems Confrontation and System Destruction Warfare, How the Chinese People's Liberation Army Seeks to Wage Modern Warfare. And we will have a link to this report in the show notes for those who are interested to check it out in detail. So this report came out in the 2018 timeframe. So presumably you were working on it before that even. So at least 4 years ago. Why did you write this report, and what has been the reaction?
So I wrote this report because I was running into systems terms regularly when reading Chinese People's Liberation Army's own literature on military operations. I found that systems and systems-related concepts were everywhere, and anyone paying attention to what the PLA was saying about itself and the broader security environment within this literature could not avoid bumping into these terms. And so I was finding that everything from the publicly released National Defense White Papers published by the PRC, which are the most authoritative texts we have access to on Beijing's understanding of the national security environment, all the way to PLA professional military education textbooks, which regularly devoted at least a chapter on whatever topic the book covered to systems, all the way to PLA newspaper articles, which were mentioning systems confrontation as a key focus of the PLA's own training exercises. And so, frankly, it was impossible not to see systems everywhere in this broad body of literature. And so as a result, my colleagues and I recognized it was an important topic, but at the time we really didn't realize how important and central it was to PLA thinking. So when I began researching this topic on behalf of our sponsor, I believed I was researching a niche topic, one that would shed some light on something that was interesting, but that would only be, useful for a relatively small group of PLA watchers. What I didn't realize from the start of this research was that systems and systems thinking were the very foundation by which the PLA understands modern warfare, and that is a concept that is regularly referred to as systems confrontation. And from this understanding of warfare or systems confrontation, the PLA had then developed a new theory of victory, a concept known as and regularly referred to as systems destruction warfare.
Right. Yeah. So like you were just saying, Jeff, I've heard that term a lot. System of systems is something that I've heard increasingly over the last few years, and that seems like a pretty critical concept for us to understand. Could you unpack that just a little bit more? And does China tend to think about systems differently than the West does?
Yes, I think so. So in the current era of warfighting, according to the PLA, system of systems warfighting, otherwise known or referred to sometimes as operational systems based on information systems. These are systems that are created when the PLA recognizes a wide range of operational units, operational what they call elements, and operational systems are linked together via information networks. And so systems of systems, according to PLA thinkers, allows these military units, platforms, and systems to become much greater once networked together than the sum of their individual parts. And so these systems can be evaluated based on their combined capabilities and functions, and can be either robust at warfighting and even potentially self-healing, or conversely, these systems can be very brittle because they overly rely on single points of failure that could be vulnerable to enemy attack. And so much of this kind of thinking will resonate with listeners who remember legacy U.S. military concepts such as net-centric warfare, effects-based operations, Colonel John Warden's rings theory, and all of these were introduced from the 90s to the mid 2000s. US military thinkers at that time were also recognizing the revolutionary effect of information and what that effect was having on the battlefield, and seeking to apply these new concepts and develop new theories of victories for the United States. PRC thinkers and PLA strategists were also influenced by these writings, but I would argue that they came to their own conclusions about the significance of the revolutionary effect on information on the battlefield, which resulted in systems becoming the foundation for how the PLA, as an enterprise-wide entity, not just a service-wide or a concept for a relatively limited period of time, I think, in the U.S. system, but how systems became the main framework for PLA modernization, equipment development, training, and organizational changes. And so in short, the PLA recognized that a new era of warfighting had dawned and that it had to catch up, and the consequences could be severe if it didn't, like the Iraqi or Yugoslav militaries in the 90s. It could be defeated on the battlefield, regardless of its size, or even if it relied on interior lines of communication.
Mm, right. So, well, thanks for unpacking that a little bit more. I, I guess I find myself still in more of a conceptual realm, uh, g- as opposed to like a practical realm, thinking of systems. So, could you maybe give just a couple of concrete examples of what you mean by systems, or the variety of systems, and maybe as just like to help get the ball rolling, or as a point of comparison. So like some of our listeners might be thinking, and I certainly was thinking, that China's Belt and Road Initiative, their geopolitical initiative, could be thought of as a big, massive system of systems. So, is this the kind of system that you're talking about? What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So what my research really looks at are what the PLA terms as operational systems. They are systems that carry out military operations, usually PLA military campaigns, but they can also carry out strategic actions as well as be scoped to carry out more tactical actions as well. But these are systems that are created and usually under the command of a theater commander within the PLA system, and these are very purpose-built entities that are composed of different aspects. And almost always they are composed of a kinetic strike capability, a non-kinetic cyber EW psychological strike, as well as defensive capability, supporting systems, as well as reconnaissance intelligence systems, and a command system. And so these are very specific for military applications. The Belt and Road absolutely could be considered a system, and I've seen in the literature mentions of major strategic systems that take aspects of national power and of which the military might be a component of it. So, for example, there's a strategic mobilization system, which definitely includes the military, but also includes many civilian transport infrastructure aspects to that. There's a strategic reconnaissance intelligence system, which provides even peacetime reconnaissance for the PRC as well as the PLA. And so the BRI is mostly a economic initiative, of the PRC, which also has diplomatic and informational components to it. And so could be conceived of as a system, and pieces of that are probably incorporated within other strategic notions of strategic systems within the PRC. But my research hasn't focused on the BRI in particular to be able to definitively talk about how it is a system and what pieces are system of systems.
I see. Well, based on your research, how does China plan on attacking systems? And you use a term in your paper, comprehensive dominance. What does that mean as well?
Absolutely. So achieving victory under this notion of systems confrontation means that the PLA must either attain or at least contest comprehensive dominance, what it calls comprehensive dominance in all warfighting domains. And ideally, it achieves dominance in each of these domains, or at least tries to prevent its adversary from achieving dominance in those same domains, because any domain could be the key to success, or the back door by which an adversary uses its supremacy to achieve victory against the PLA. So as a result of this understanding, the PLA's own theory of victory, or what is referred to as systems destruction warfare, and is what the PLA sees as warfare that intends to disrupt, paralyze, or even destroy an adversary's operational system. And so they talk about this paralysis of their adversary's operational system occurring when that operational system structure is significantly weakened, the mechanisms that coordinate that operational system are disrupted, and or the procedures of that operational system have become disordered. And so to the PLA, effectively waging system destruction warfare, PLA planners and commanders must really understand their adversary's operational system and understand the degree of influence that various aspects of that operational system have on the overall functioning of that system, and specifically try to find bottlenecks and brittle points within that operational system. And so specifically, the PLA thinks about 4 broad target types when attacking its adversary, either through kinetic or non-kinetic attacks. And first and foremost is attacking the information flow. And that is to make the different components of these operational systems quote, information isolated, cut off and unable to be additive to that broader system of systems. Second is attacks against what they call essential elements. And these are usually networks, such as the command and control network, the intelligence or and reconnaissance network, or other functional capabilities, such as maneuver and protection. The third type of attack is an operational architecture attack against these systems. And so it is specifically attacking physical nodes of these same elements or networks. So physically attacking nodes of the command and control network, like command posts, or the information transmission network. And then fourth is what they call attacks against time and tempo of the operational system, which seeks to disrupt essentially the adversary's OODA loop. But they call it the reconnaissance control attack evaluation process. And so doing things faster than your adversary and attacking them before they have time to respond, and then attacking them again before they can respond to that attack, ultimately can outperform the adversary's operational system.
They want to preemptively attack all of this system's connective tissues and infrastructure so that we are weakened from the get-go. Would you say that that's fair?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, thinking about how the PLA has the lessons the PLA has learned from the U.S. way of warfare, as demonstrated over the past few decades, it saw a sort of proto or early phase of systems warfare demonstrated that it recognized in Desert Storm, absolutely. And so during this war, U.S. forces struck targets in Baghdad from the outset of the war, strategic C2 targets in Baghdad before attacking frontline units. And so by the time that engagement occurred at the front line, there was the information flow between strategic headquarters and frontline units had already been completely severed. Communication and situational awareness for these frontline units, was practically non-existent, and so the effectiveness and the fighting effectiveness of these frontline units, even beyond the fact that they were completely outmatched on a platform for platform basis, was rendered, useless by the PLA's own terminology, and the Iraqi system was fully paralyzed based on these keynote attacks that the U.S. carried out.
Yeah, right. So how is China going about building these capabilities, and what is the current state, or how do you assess the current state of their systems warfare aspirations, and what is their ultimate vision, would you say?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question here, and it's very difficult to gauge from afar. The PLA's current modernization efforts have been in high gear since the 1990s and have made extraordinary gains. The new missions that the PLA has undertaken and the new capabilities it has demonstrated and the modern military equipment it has created have filled volumes of research and analysis. Yet it is still a force by its own metrics that considers itself to not even have fully achieved yet mechanization, let alone what it calls informationization or informatization. Furthermore, the PLA hasn't fought a major conflict since 1979. And so whether or not the PLA is an effective fighting force against a high-end adversary today is that main question. And beyond military platforms, this really extends to PLA's training, morale, command effectiveness, and many other aspects that just can't be captured in bean count comparisons of its order of battle. But undoubtedly, the PLA is more equipped and more capable than it was in the 90s or even 5 years ago. But as Mike Tyson has famously said, everybody has a plan until getting punched in the mouth. And the question is, how well can the PLA adapt in a major multi-domain conflict against a peer adversary? Should a hypothetical future conflict evolve in ways that the PLA didn't anticipate from the initiation of combat?
Right. You've already touched upon this a couple of times, but I wanted to ask you a little bit more explicitly, Jeff. How does information and information operations factor into China's systems warfare?
Yeah, so according to PLA thinkers, information is what sets this current era of warfighting apart from earlier eras. Information links every part of its system of systems together. Information, according to many PLA sources, is likened to blood in a nervous system. And in the same way, as a human body, that blood must continuously flow through a body. Information must be shared and pushed to all components to ensure coordination between the units, the entities, and the platforms of the system of systems to ensure effective command and control and multi-domain operational capability. And so the information domain itself, which according to the PLA consists of the cyber, electromagnetic, and psychological domains, is considered in this current era of warfighting to be the most important domain. And similar to how the air domain was considered the most important in a previous era of warfighting, uh, uh, because command of the air enabled command of the land and sea, and without it, superiority couldn't be gained in the land or sea domains. Similarly, in this new era, the information domain has sort of replaced the air domain as that new domain of dominance, and the control of the information domain has become a necessary, but still not sufficient condition for winning modern multi-domain warfare. And so information operations, as far as the PLA are concerned, are operations that take place in the information domain, or are operations that are leveraged by the information domain. And so the information operations are usually subcategorized as offensive, defensive, reconnaissance, or other supporting information operations. And information operations, whether in the form of cyber, psychological, or electromagnetic operations, are often the first military operations initiated by belligerents during modern conflict. And these are operations that run throughout the course of any conflict. And when the conflict goes from non-kinetic to kinetic, information operations then support and increase the effectiveness of those kinetic operations within the physical domains.
Your analogy with the blood flow, information is like the blood flow, really works. And also back to your response about, how does China go about attacking enemy systems? Like everything you described there was a way of either restricting or tarnishing or somehow altering the flow of blood or the flow of information within adversarial systems, it seems. And so uh, again, a really vivid analogy for an appropriate way of thinking about information, it seems. What's been the reaction to this report?
So it was the fifth most downloaded report on the RAND website in
Is that right?
2018.
Is that right? I didn't know what your response was going to be here, but it wouldn't have surprised me if you gave a completely opposite response. Like it's been surprisingly quiet. There hasn't been much notice. But okay, I'm actually kind of glad to hear that there's been it seems to by download count anyway, a positive response.
Yes, absolutely. Especially for a report that I thought well, was originally going to be a sort of niche topic. And it's also been incorporated into a U.S. military senior level joint professional military education.
Excellent. Yeah, good. Do you think we could do a lightning round, Jeff, and then wrap up? So, lightning round, 15, 30 seconds per response, that kind of thing. Sun Tzu compared to Clausewitz.
So both recognize numerous variables that determine victory and defeat, including role of intelligence, strategy, terrain, weather, etc. Clausewitz, in a very different, more recent era, obviously recognized and considered also the importance of policy or politics, and specifically that war is a continuation of policy or politics by other means.
Right. Nonlinear.
So PLA texts regularly mention nonlinear as a characterization of the modern warfighting environment, in that operational forces are deployed irregularly throughout the battlefield, and combat is carried out in multiple directions and domains simultaneously.
Space.
And space is probably the next most important domain for the PLA after the information domain, and in conjunction with the information domain, it is where a lot of information transmission and information capabilities are nested. And so space is a very important domain for the PLA.
Last lightning round. War games.
War games are what both the US and the PLA are carrying out to try to test these new concepts based on these new realities of warfighting.
Wrapping up here, Jeff. So we have a lot of students and researchers who listen to this podcast. Could you offer a fruitful research question that's related to the kinds of things we've been discussing here?
Yes, there are any number of research questions that could be fruitfully researched. One major one is what lessons are the PLA learning from current conflicts in Ukraine and elsewhere, and how are these lessons shaping its understanding of systems and systems warfare?
Excellent. And then finally, could you recommend a book or other online resource that for anybody interested to taking a deeper dive, in addition to your report, again, link in the show notes, that someone can check out if they like?
Absolutely. So a handful of books have attempted to depict future hypothetical warfare between China and the US, and there are several titles that I can think of, both from US and Chinese press, popular fiction authors that probably belong more in the realm of techno thrillers. Though many of these books aren't really informed by what PLA writings actually say about warfare or how it intends to fight future war. And unfortunately, the writings that do talk about these topics are somewhat difficult to access and largely unavailable to English only readers. However, the PRC's defense white papers I mentioned earlier have been translated into English and talk about systems, if only briefly. And then there are some other authoritative PLA texts that deal with strategy that have also been translated into English. And these can be freely accessed and downloaded on the internet. Specifically, the the China Aerospace Studies Institute, also known as CASI, has posted translations of various editions of PLA literature online, in at least two volumes of the Science of Strategy and one volume of Science of Campaigns has been translated into English. And so while systems confrontation isn't the main theme of these books, it is a common thread throughout. And the reward for a determined reader of these books is a fairly rich and nuanced discussion of what the warfighting environment looks like to the PRC and to the PLA, and how systems concepts are being applied to PLA operations.
All right. Well, excellent suggestions. We will have links to those in the show notes. And incidentally, to our audience, we also had a fantastic discussion with Brendan Mulvaney, who leads the Air Force's China Aerospace Studies Institute, or CASI. So we'll have a link to that podcast discussion with Dr. Mulvaney as well. And with that, Jeff Engstrom, you've given us a lot to think about, and thank you so much for being a guest on the Cognitive Crucible.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.